I remember the very first movie that I ever saw in the theater. I was 8 years old, and I went with my dad to the movie, got out of the car, found our way to the counter where there was popcorn and Coca-Cola, grabbed this big bucket of popcorn and made our way into the theater, found just the perfect seat, sat down, and saw the epic scroll on the screen, which said, "In a galaxy far, far away." It was Star Wars. And when I was sitting there watching that movie, my world changed. I instantly became a sci-fi fan. I still remember that Christmas right after the movie of seeing all of these spacecraft and people moving from planet to planet, and Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader and all of these characters that came to life. And as I was sitting around that Christmas tree and opening one of the packages, my parents got me one of the Luke Skywalker characters. And I also had the Darth Vader character as well. And I'll never forget playing in my backyard, pretending like I was Luke Skywalker. I was bringing light to the universe. We were defeating Darth Vader, and it was an awesome moment. I think about stories like these that really are fictional stories. They're made-up tales. They're fairy tales. But behind those stories, there's a reality of darkness and light. There's a reality of good and evil. It's a good and an evil that we experience on planet Earth. That's why we write about it and talk about it. It's why we sing about it. As that we're engaged in a world in which there's this epic struggle of darkness and light, good and evil. In World War II, as Germany was beginning to take country after country after country, and they had their sights set on England, and in particular London. And London, in order to hold off the attack of the German bombardiers, they enforced blackout conditions in London. They would cover every single light in London. They would cover the lamp posts, and they would cover the traffic lights, and they would cover the porch lights. Anything that had light, they would cover, so that the German bombardiers wouldn't be able to determine exactly where to let go and release their bombs, which would bring such great destruction to the city. But something happened in the city of London that the authorities weren't quite prepared for. While soldiers were fighting on the front lines against the great evil of Nazi Germany, crime skyrocketed in London. Lots of crime and fraud, lots of pickpockets, and all of these things were taking place, so much so that even murder skyrocketed during the blackout conditions in London. I think that's often what we feel and sense in our world today. As we think about Nazi Germany in the 1940s, we experience darkness like that. It's not the same, it's different, because we hear in the news almost every single day of war and terrorism. We hear of refugees, and we hear of people in dire poverty, people that don't have enough food to live on. And there's this darkness that seems to encroach around us day after day. So much so that sometimes it's difficult to watch the news on TV or to read it on our phones. We feel the darkness out there. But the problem, like 1942 in Europe, is that the darkness wasn't just out there in Germany. The darkness was in London as well. And so it is with us. The darkness isn't just out there, it's something that we struggle with as well. We struggle with the darkness in our own heart. Words of anger and frustration, words of bitterness, anxiety, fear, depression, even suicide that we all struggle with. It's not a darkness that's just out there. It's a darkness that's in our own heart. A struggle between darkness and light. And this isn't just some fairy tale. This is real. This isn't just a story of Star Wars. This is the story of our lives. Darkness and light. And so often we want the light in our lives, but too often we succumb to the darkness. How do we overcome? C.S. Lewis, a popular author, he wrote a story that was published in 1950. It's called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And he writes about these 4 children that are living in England during World War II, and they're carted away from London and taken to the countryside to avoid the German bombing that's taken place in London. And as these 4 kids find themselves in the countryside, they find themselves in an unknown home, a large home, and they begin to explore and discover all of the different rooms in this huge house. And Lucy, the youngest of the children, she makes her way in an upstairs room in a forgotten place with a huge wardrobe that's staring at her. And as she opens up the wardrobe, it's big enough that she can literally step into it. And as she makes her way to the back of the wardrobe, she discovers that she's no longer on earth. She's in a different land. She's in a land called Narnia. And over a sequence of events, she invites the other children in the house to come with her into the wardrobe and to make their way into this land of Narnia. It's a magical land, a land where creatures speak. But there's a darkness in Narnia as well. It's not a darkness that we know of, the lack of light. One of the creatures told the children, they said, it's always winter in Narnia, and it's never Christmas. The darkness that was in Narnia was the cold, and it was the control of the white witch who was wreaking havoc on the land of Narnia. And the kids were so afraid of the cold, and they were so afraid of what these creatures were telling them about the wicked white witch. They would talk about the witch who would be on her sleigh looking for subjects to whom she could control. And off in the distance one day, they hear the sleigh bells jingling. And it didn't bring laughter, it brought tears of terror as they scurried off and hid from the white witch. But instead of the white witch, it was a great big man on a sleigh, dressed in red and white. It was Father Christmas. And he says to the children, I've finally broken through. Her power has no hold on me. Aslan is on the move. Long live the true king. And off he goes. I think C.S. Lewis knew what he was writing about. He was talking about the importance of Christmas. That Christmas is the beginning of light breaking through the darkness. That the enemy no longer has a hold on those who would look to the true light coming into the world. And this is what John wrote about in his gospel. He said, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. And this is why we celebrate Christmas. We celebrate the light of the world coming to humanity, that he begins to pierce through the dark places of the world. In our agony, in our pain, in our chaos and confusion, light breaks through. This is the power of Christmas. John, in his gospel, again writes, he says, the Word became flesh. God became human and made his home with us. That's the power of Christmas. In 1943, as soldiers were serving on the front lines in Europe, fighting Nazi Germany. Bing Crosby was back in America, and in October of that year, he sung a song that became an instant classic. It was "I'll Be Home for Christmas," and it became the anthem song for the soldiers that were serving overseas. They would sing the lyrics to the song, "I'll be home for Christmas. You can count on me. Have snow and mistletoe and presents under the tree. I'll be home for Christmas. You can count on me." You see, there was something burning on the inside of these soldiers that knew that where they were serving on the front lines, fighting the evil of their day, that was not their home. That their home was back in America where things were beautiful and bright and Christmas awaited them. And in the same way that we could look at that, this world is not our home. That there's another place that God is preparing for us. That this world has just experienced just the beginnings of the brightness that God has for us. That we see in a mirror dimly, we see darkly, but one day we're going to see Him face to face. That's the power of Christmas, that this is just the beginning, that God has something amazing and beautiful and bright for you. And He has His arms open wide to you this evening, this Christmas evening. And He says, come unto me, all you who are heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus promises us rest in a sin-weary world. Would you give your life to Him? He went to the cross just for you and for me. He died, and as He died, He took the sins of the world upon Himself. Your mistakes, my mistakes, your failures. Those areas where you know in your heart of hearts are wrong, God took those upon Himself. And He died. But He didn't just die because the darkness can never extinguish the light. He rose again and shines forevermore. That is the power of the gospel. And it's available to all of you. And Jesus simply has one request. And it might just be the most challenging request you'll ever hear. Jesus says, "Come to me. Deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me." Tonight I'm asking you that question. Is your life filled with darkness? Maybe you struggle with a selfish heart. Maybe you struggle with words of anger, or maybe you're experiencing depression or anxiety. I want you to know that God has His arms open wide for you, and He wants to bring the light of His love into your life. But He requires you to come to Him, for you to say that you can't do it in your own strength and your own power, that you begin to trust Him. You come to His light and allow Him to illuminate the path for you. It's a powerful question. Have you surrendered to the light of Christ? Tonight I want to give you that opportunity to make a simple prayer, to be able to acknowledge in your own heart of hearts that maybe, just maybe, there's some darkness in you and that you need the light of God to illuminate your way. Would you close your eyes and bow your heads with me this evening? There may be some of you here that would say, "Yeah, that's me, Pastor David. I struggle with the darkness in my life. I need the light of God in my heart." And if that's you, in just a second, we're going to pray a prayer, and I'm simply going to ask you just to, in your own heart, make these your own words. And I believe as you do that God will be faithful to His word, that He will come into your life and He will begin to illuminate the path for you, that He'll make you a brand new person and make all things new for you. Just, again, in your own heart of hearts, repeat this after me. Say, "Jesus, I need you. Struggling with the darkness in my own life. I acknowledge my failure and my sins, my mistakes, and I lay them down. I believe you died on the cross, that you rose again to give me new life. Now come into my heart, Jesus. Make your home with me. Amen. I believe if you prayed that prayer sincerely between you and the Lord, that God is making all things new. And this is what the Apostle John says. One of Jesus' closest friends on earth, he lived to about 95 years old, and he wrote this as he had a vision of heaven. He said, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. They will have no need of the sun or the moon, for the glory of God illuminates the city, and Jesus is its light. He, Jesus, will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever. That is the power of Christmas, that we have a home in heaven because Jesus came and wrapped himself in flesh and was born in a stable 2,000 years ago. So tonight, as we light candles, and as you see all the candles being lit, I want you to have this in your mind. It represents two things. One, that the light that we have is just the beginning. It's Jesus piercing through the darkness. But more than just piercing the darkness here on planet Earth, one day, this light represents a small fraction of the beauty and the glory and the brightness that heaven has for us, that God will make his home with us.